Welcome to the White Knight Theater, episode 13 of The Dark One, the appearance of the goddess of revenge. Han Hao still harbors some distrust towards Luo Fei. In the following operations, he assigned Luo Fei to conduct peripheral investigations on a case from 98 years ago, without directly participating in the actions. Luo Fei opened Zheng Haoming's case-solving diary and began to read, uncovering some hidden information about the case from 18 years ago. The diary led to clues to the only survivor of the explosion. April 25th, 1984. Light rain. The investigation in the past few days had yielded no results until today, when a breakthrough finally emerged. In the afternoon, the survivor finally regained consciousness. However, when I questioned him, he couldn't remember anything. He couldn't even recall his own name. The doctor said this was a common form of amnesia in severely injured patients. I had to take some proactive measures to help him regain his memory. I went to the site of the explosion and took some photos of the cement pipe where he was suspected to have lived. However, the photos would take until tomorrow to be developed. April 26th, 1984. Cloudy. I showed the photos of the cement pipe to the man. At first, he still looked bewildered. Later, I showed him the copper wires and told him they were from his pocket. I encouraged him to try to remember what had happened before he lost consciousness. His expression seemed to indicate that he had recalled something. He struggled to speak. I put my ear close to his mouth and heard his first words. Yunxian, the cement pipe. He continued, I live there. I was so happy when I realized I was alive. He later told me his name was Huang Xiaoping, and he came from a rural area in Anhui. His parents had passed away, so he had to come to the provincial capital to make a living. Unable to find a job, he had to stay in the cement pipe, surviving by scavenging and selling scrap. I asked him what had happened on the day of the incident, but his memory seemed to fail again. He just shook his head and remained silent. Maybe tomorrow I should bring some photos from the explosion site. April 27th, 1984. I showed Huang Xiaoping the photos from the explosion site. He looked terrified. I told him that 2 people, a man and a woman, had been killed in the explosion at the factory, and he had been severely injured at the scene. Huang Xiaoping finally began to recall the events of that day. On the afternoon of the incident, I saw 3 people, 2 men and a woman, enter the abandoned factory one after another. I found it strange. Finally, when the woman entered the factory, I couldn't contain my curiosity and followed her in quietly. What happened next? The man and the woman were talking, but before I could understand what was going on, an explosion suddenly occurred. Huang Xiaoping's account of the conversation matched Luo Fei's description. According to his description, the man who entered the factory first had left half an hour before the woman arrived. Based on this, it was inferred that this man was very likely the culprit. Huang Xiaoping had seen the man's figure and face from a distance in the cement pipe. He said that if he saw the man again or a photo of him, he might be able to recognize him. Luo Fei paused to think. Since Huang Xiaoping had seen the suspect, why hadn't a composite sketch been made? This question seemed easy to answer. At that time, there was no computer simulation technology, and manual drawing required a very clear impression of the target. Huang Xiaoping had only seen the man from a distance, making it difficult to provide an accurate description. Continuing to read, the case team made no substantial progress for a long period. The intervals between Zheng Haoming's diary entries grew longer, and his writings increasingly conveyed disappointment and frustration. 2 years later, with no new cases emerging, the special task force was temporarily disbanded, and the investigation came to a halt. However, Zheng Haoming's diary had recently resumed. The following entries were found in his office after he was murdered. October 13th, 2002. I had thought the matter was long over, and all the memories would be permanently sealed away like those files. Maybe I was wrong. This morning, I received an anonymous letter containing a short URL. As soon as I saw the letter, my heart began to race uncontrollably. I was all too familiar with the handwriting, standard imitation song typeface. I had studied similar anonymous letters countless times 18 years ago. I opened the URL, and the content on the webpage shocked me. Was he back? I could hardly believe it. Or was this just a prank by someone who knew about the case back then? The task force had already been disbanded, and I was probably the only member still working on the front line. What should I do? Report to the provincial department and restart the investigation? No, that seemed too hasty. But since this involved secrets, I couldn't let Han Hao and the others get involved. I had to come up with some ideas on my own. October 14th, 2002. Today, through personal connections, I found Zheng Rihua from the provincial department, who agreed to help me with online surveillance. With his assistance, I had already taken some photos. I borrowed a digital camera from the team. It was quite troublesome to use, and I spent a long time learning. Since it involved secrets, I couldn't ask others for help. I just hoped that what I was doing wasn't in vain. October 19th, 2002. I took many more photos today. In the evening, I went to see Huang Xiaoping and asked him to identify the photos, but there was no result. No matter which article online, there were many viewers and repliers, but the poster remained inactive. Maybe this was just a prank after all. Most of the people online were young kids, and it was hard to connect them with the case from 18 years ago. Maybe I should investigate these kids. I heard that the provincial department's computer database had been hacked recently. Perhaps the files on the 418 case had been leaked. Zheng Haoming's diary ended here. The next day, on the night of October 20th, he was murdered at home. If Inspector Zheng had reported to Shang Tian earlier, he would have known during the struggle with the murderer that this was not just a child's prank. But it was already too late. A sudden knock on the door interrupted Luo Fei's thoughts. He tidied up the case files, got up, and opened the door. Mu Jianyun stood in front of him. "Hello, Inspector Luo," she said. "Hello, Professor Mu. Did you come to discuss the case?" "Come in and let's talk," he replied. Mu Jianyun entered the room and sat opposite Luo Fei on the sofa. She glanced at the case files on the table and then looked directly at Luo Fei. "I've just reviewed the case materials and have some questions for you." "Inspector Luo," she said. "You're too polite, Professor Mu." "Let's discuss it together," he replied. "You know, I studied psychology, so my approach to the case might be different from yours. I will analyze the suspect's motives and psychological state to deduce their social background, life experiences, and personality traits," she said. Specifically, in this case, both the previous anonymous letters and the recent online posts were signed with the same name. As she spoke, she picked up a pen and wrote a word on a sticky note. Eumenides. She looked up at Luo Fei and asked, "Do you know the English word for Eumenides?" "My English isn't very good. I think it's Eumenides. It's usually translated into Chinese as Eumenides, the name of the goddess of revenge in Greek mythology," he replied. According to legend, Eumenides pursues those who have committed serious crimes. No matter where the sinners are, she follows them, tormenting their conscience with deep regret until they pay for their crimes, she explained. Luo Fei pondered the mythological figure and its connection to the content of the anonymous letters, which indeed sparked some interesting associations. Mu Jianyun intended to delve deeper into this topic. In the 418 case, both victims had received anonymous letters, which were death notices issued in the name of Eumenides. On the surface, it seemed that the perpetrator was using the name of the goddess of revenge to punish the sinners. So, my most pressing question now is whether the two victims, Xue Dalin and Yuan Jibong, really committed the sins listed in the letters, she concluded. In episode 14 of The Dark One, Luo Fei delved into Zheng Haoming's diary, gaining a deeper understanding of the case that had occurred 18 years ago. At this point, Mu Jianyun approached Luo Fei and began discussing the signature used by the suspect in the anonymous letters, which led the conversation back to the 418 case. She questioned Luo Fei about whether the charges against the two victims, Xue Dalin and Yuan Jibong, were true. Xue Dalin was the deputy director of the Public Security Bureau. Whether he neglected his duties, accepted bribes, and was involved with criminal organizations, I don't know. At that time, I was just a police academy student. As for Yuan Jibong, you can consider the content of the anonymous letter to be true. What do you mean, can be considered true, Inspector Luo? Mu Jianyun pressed. I know Yuan Jibong was once your best friend, but when it comes to the case, I hope you can give an accurate and definitive answer. All right, Luo Fei conceded. Yuan Jibong was an outstanding police academy student, and I admired him in many ways. However, he had a fatal flaw. He was too fond of attracting women. Mu Jianyun recalled Yuan Jibong's photo. He was indeed a very handsome young man, and it was no surprise that he had a lot of female admirers. Yuan Jibong had dated several girlfriends. Half a year before the incident, he had started dating a girl from the school's administrative management department. She was very beautiful, and Yuan Jibong genuinely liked her. The girl had even had an abortion for him. At that time, I thought maybe this time he would settle down. But a few months later, I don't know, perhaps it was just his nature. In any case, he was the one who ended the relationship. The girl, heartbroken and crying, came to find Yuan Jibong, and he even asked me to cover for him. Unexpectedly, the girl, unable to bear the pain, attempted suicide by drowning. Humph, men are all the same. None of them are good, Mu Jianyun muttered. What about Yuan Jibong himself, she continued. Wasn't he affected at all by this? No, Luo Fei replied. At that time, he already had a new girlfriend, someone he had met through a radio chat as a pen pal. After exchanging letters for a while, they decided to meet officially. Their first date was on the day of the incident, April 18th. Luo Fei had mentioned in the meeting that Yuan Jibong had gone out that day to meet a pen pal. So, this pen pal was probably the last person to see Yuan Jibong before the case happened. I know what you're thinking, but you'll be disappointed, Luo Fei said. The special task force came to our dormitory that day and investigated the letters exchanged between Yuan Jibong and the pen pal. They traced the address and found the girl, who was a student at another university in the city. But the girl had never arranged to meet Yuan Jibong. Her classmates could testify that she hadn't left school that day. So what happened? Mu Jianyun asked. The last letter arranging the meeting with Yuan Jibong was written using the girl's address and name, but it wasn't from her. Someone had impersonated her and written the letter to Yuan Jibong, Luo Fei explained. Yes, he continued. Zheng Haoming later told me that the handwriting in the letter was also in the standard imitation song typeface. I see, Mu Jianyun said. The murderer lured Yuan Jibong out using this method. Yuan Jibong lived on campus, and it would have been almost impossible to commit murder in such a communal setting. So, the murderer lured him to a remote suburban area, and a bomb could destroy all the evidence at the scene. He was indeed a meticulous and thoughtful person, Mu Jianyun mused. After a moment of contemplation, she looked up at Luo Fei, her eyes twinkling. But in this particular case, the guy did something that was actually quite satisfying. Yuan Jibong toyed with women, abandoned one when she was pregnant, and drove her to suicide. Inspector Luo, don't you think he was committing a crime? She asked pointedly. Luo Fei lowered his head, looking embarrassed. After a brief silence, he met Mu Jianyun's gaze. Yuan Jibong was my friend. If you knew him like I did, you'd understand that although he sometimes acted recklessly, he wasn't a bad person at his core. All right, it's a bit harsh to judge the deceased so harshly, Mu Jianyun conceded. Inspector Luo, thank you for helping me clear up some of my doubts. Now I have a clearer picture of the perpetrator's psychological profile. What are your next steps? I plan to meet Huang Xiaoping. Look at this note. Inspector Zheng left us Huang Xiaoping's contact information, Luo Fei said. That's great. I'd like to meet him too. How about we go together tomorrow? Mu Jianyun suggested. Since Han Hao doesn't need us to get involved in his work, I have no reason to refuse, Luo Fei agreed readily. At 7:12 a.m. on October 22nd, although it was already daylight, the autumn rain continued to drizzle, and the gloomy weather created an illusion of dusk. Huang Xiaoping woke up from the pain. The wounds all over his body had healed on the surface, but during rainy weather, they ached as if being cut by a knife or burned by fire. He gritted his teeth and took a sharp breath, the pain bringing his thoughts back to 18 years ago. He vividly remembered that moment when the woman pulled the fuse of the bomb, and then a burst of flames erupted from the man and woman. He barely had time to think before a wave of heat and a massive impact hit him. He thought he was done for. Before losing consciousness, Huang Xiaoping felt a bone-chilling fear and despair. yet he miraculously survived. With 75% of his body severely burned and 7 fractures, it was nothing short of a miracle. However, that moment had changed his destiny. When he struggled back from the brink of death, he appeared to others as a terrifying monster and a pitiful wreck. His life seemed to have been shattered in that instant, and since then, he could only hide in the shadows. People were afraid to see him, and he was afraid to see others. He was as lonely as a shadow, and no one truly understood how he had endured the past 18 years. Huang Xiaoping lay curled up on the bed, trying to endure the torment of the pain. Suddenly, his ears twitched slightly, and he held his breath, as if waiting for something. The pain seemed to sharpen his other senses. Huang Xiaoping heard someone approaching his shack, and sure enough, a few seconds later, there was a knock on the door. "Who is it?" he called out. "Police," came the response. "Always the police. Who else would come to my tattered house?" Huang Xiaoping muttered to himself. He struggled to get up, leaning on his crutch, and shuffled over to open the door. A man and a woman in plain clothes stood at the entrance, their faces filled with shock. Huang Xiaoping was used to such expressions. Anyone who saw him and didn't run away in fear was already doing well. "Are you the police? Where's Inspector Zheng?" he asked. "I'm Luo Fei from the Longzhou Public Security Bureau. This is Mu Jianyun, a lecturer from the Provincial Police Academy." The man introduced himself, showing his badge. The pretty woman forced a smile, clearly still struggling with the psychological impact of Huang Xiaoping's appearance. Luo Fei, Huang Xiaoping mumbled, looking at the name on the badge. He then raised his eyes and examined the unexpected visitors with his cloudy gaze. His scaras were exaggeratedly large due to his burned eyelids, giving off a chilling vibe. Luo Fei felt a shiver run down his spine under such a stare, but fortunately, the man quickly turned and walked back into the room. "Are you coming in?" he asked. "Close the door, please." "It's freezing outside," he added. Luo Fei and Mu Jianyun entered the room, and a musty, damp smell hit them. Mu Jianyun couldn't help but cough lightly. Huang Xiaoping, not wearing a jacket, huddled on the edge of the bed, pulling the dirty quilt over himself. Mu Jianyun gently closed the wooden door, and the room suddenly darkened, the atmosphere becoming so oppressive that it was almost suffocating. Luo Fei didn't want to stay in this environment for long and got straight to the point. "We're here to ask you about the case 18 years ago," he said. "The explosion case." Episode 15 of The Dark One, Unbearable Memories of the Past. Listen to Luo Fei recount the events that happened to his classmate and close friend Yuan Jibong back then. This resolves some of the doubts in Mu Jianyun's mind. After reading Zheng Haoming's case notes, Luo Fei and Mu Jianyun knocked on the door of the dilapidated shack early in the morning of October 12th and, as they had hoped, met Huang Xiaoping. They intended to talk directly with Huang Xiaoping about the explosion case that had happened 18 years ago. Huang Xiaoping looked at the two with a wry smile on his face. "Alas, it seems the only purpose of my existence now is for this." "Where's Inspector Zheng?" he asked. "Why didn't he come?" "He's dead," Luo Fei replied. "Inspector Zheng was murdered by criminals the night before last. The police believe his death is related to the explosion case from 18 years ago, which is why we're investigating this matter," Luo Fei explained. "How could that be?" Huang Xiaoping said in disbelief. "He was here just a few days ago. He had you identify some photos, didn't he?" Luo Fei questioned. "At that time, I didn't find anything in those photos," Huang Xiaoping said slowly, as if trying to recall something. After a moment, he shook his head. "No, the person I saw at the scene of the crime wasn't in those photos." "Can you be sure?" "You need to understand that the murderer killed Inspector Zheng precisely to cover up certain photos," Luo Fei said. "I'm certain. The photos Inspector Zheng showed me were all of young guys. Their ages were completely off," Huang Xiaoping replied. "Let's not talk about those photos for now. Let's change direction. Tell us in detail what you saw on the day of the explosion," Luo Fei said. "I've told that story many times already," Huang Xiaoping said. "Yes, I know. I've read your statement, but I want to hear it from your own mouth," Luo Fei insisted. All right, Huang Xiaoping sighed. 18 years ago, I had just come to the city from the countryside. I had no choice but to make a living by scavenging. I usually stayed in the cement pipe outside the chemical plant. On April 18th, that afternoon, I was too lazy to go out and just lay in the cement pipe, sleeping. Later, I saw people going into that place one after another. At first, I didn't pay much attention until I saw a woman also enter the place. I thought to myself, why would a man and a woman be in an abandoned factory? I had no improper thoughts, but curiosity got the better of me, and I almost lost my life because of it. Huang Xiaoping, watch your words, Luo Fei warned. One of those two people was my girlfriend, and the other was my best friend. Huang Xiaoping's face showed surprise and fear. He looked up at Luo Fei, who had suddenly become extremely sharp-eyed. Realizing this, Huang Xiaoping instinctively shut his mouth. Luo Fei waved his hand to control his emotions. All right, let's drop that for now. The record says you saw 3 people enter the chemical plant, Luo Fei continued. Yes, 3 people, 2 men and a woman. But the first man left before the woman arrived, Huang Xiaoping replied. Can you tell me the exact times when the 3 people arrived and left? Luo Fei asked. Sorry, Inspector Luo, I can't give you the exact times. I don't have a watch. I can only tell you that the first man went in, and about half an hour later, the second man arrived. Then, after a while, the first man left, and finally, the woman came, Huang Xiaoping said. Luo Fei and Mu Jianyun exchanged glances, both understanding that the second man Huang Xiaoping mentioned was Yuan Jibang, and the woman was Meng Yan. From this, they deduced that the first man was very likely the murderer. He had impersonated Yuan Jibang's pen pal, lured him to this remote place, and then ambushed him, suddenly attacking and subduing him. He also planted a bomb on Yuan Jibang. After the murderer left, Meng Yun came to the chemical plant to look for Yuan Jibang. The record says you saw the face of the first man, but you only saw him from a distance. You weren't very clear about his features, but you said that if you saw him again, you could recognize him, right? Luo Fei asked. I just said I might recognize him, but I might not. It was so far away, Huang Xiaoping said, his mouth twisted, revealing his yellow and black teeth. Mu Jianyun looked at him and shook her head, clearly very disappointed. Luo Fei had wanted to ask about the man's height, but then he thought that even a professional's judgment would have a large margin of error at such a distance. How reliable could Huang Xiaoping's answer be? So he moved on to the next topic directly. What did you see after you entered the factory? I sneaked into the factory building, but didn't dare go too deep. I just peeked inside from near the entrance. I saw the later man sitting on the ground and the woman squatting beside him. They seemed very nervous. The man kept pushing the woman to leave, as if he couldn't walk himself. If I couldn't figure out what they were doing, I would continue to sneak a peek out of curiosity. Later, the woman was talking into a square box. Inspector Zheng told me that thing was called a walkie-talkie. At that time, the woman mentioned something about a red wire or a blue wire, and another man's voice came from the walkie-talkie, saying, All right, I know all of this already. Ah, you don't need to say more, Luo Fei said after a moment of silence, struggling to continue. You only need to tell me the final moment. The final moment was when the man in the factory said to cut the red wire. The woman seemed to follow his instructions and did so. And then came the explosion, a terrible explosion. Do you remember his appearance? His expression, his movements. You were watching him the whole time, weren't you? Luo Fei asked. You mean the woman? Huang Xiaoping clarified. Yes, I was watching her the whole time. It's strange. She was very nervous before, but at the last moment, she seemed not afraid at all. I even thought she was smiling. She looked very beautiful when she calmed down, Huang Xiaoping replied. Luo Fei clenched his fists tightly, his thumbnail digging deeply into the flesh of his index finger. After a while, he managed to regulate his breathing and said, I need to go outside for some fresh air. This room is too stuffy. Mu Jianyun seemed to understand Luo Fei's feelings and opened the door, letting a gust of cool, fresh air into the room, which made Luo Fei feel much more comfortable. Just as he was about to step outside, Huang Xiaoping's voice came from behind. Inspector Luo, wait a moment. What is it? Luo Fei asked. It's cold. I want to put on some thermal pants. Could you help me? I'm really disabled. The pants are in the box by the bed, Huang Xiaoping said. Luo Fei followed Huang Xiaoping's instructions and found the thermal pants in the box. Huang Xiaoping took off his outer trousers himself. Mu Jianyun frowned and turned to step outside. Taking advantage of Luo Fei's proximity, Huang Xiaoping suddenly whispered into Luo Fei's ear. Inspector Luo, are you investigating me? Of course not. We're colleagues on the Special Task Force now, Luo Fei replied. Huang Xiaoping stretched his legs into the pants and lowered his voice. When you were asking me questions, you were looking at me, but I was observing you the whole time. I noticed every expression and movement. After that case, I've met too many police officers. I understand how you work, but are you sure you're not planting me here? He's targeting you, Huang Xiaoping added. Episode 16 of The Dark One, Thrilling Arrest Operation. Huang Xiaoping once again recalled the events from 18 years ago. His description of Meng Yun's appearance before her death plunged Luo Fei back into agony. Overwhelmed by guilt, Luo Fei felt a heavy pressure in his heart. Just as he was about to step outside for some fresh air, Huang Xiaoping called out to him, citing his own disability as a reason for needing help putting on thermal pants. As Luo Fei assisted Huang Xiaoping with the thermal pants, and Mu Jianyun stepped outside to avoid suspicion, Huang Xiaoping suddenly lowered his voice and told Luo Fei, Mu Jianyun, the real target of the investigation isn't me. It's you. Luo Fei's heart tightened, but he kept his composure. After helping Huang Xiaoping finish putting on the pants, he calmly asked, Why are you telling me this? Because you were willing to help me, Huang Xiaoping replied. I know what I look like. In this world, there are very few people who don't avoid me. Luo Fei looked to Huang Xiaoping's terrifying face and felt a sudden wave of sorrow. Without saying another word, he turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. Outside, a light rain was falling. The raindrops were fine and dense, and they felt cold on his face. Mu Jianyun had been pacing outside for a while. As soon as she saw Luo Fei come out, she quickly approached him. Would you take someone else's advice? She asked. I mean, if you were Meng Yun at that moment, would you trust your own judgment or follow someone else's advice? I would trust my own judgment, but why did Meng Yun listen to you? Luo Fei countered. You yourself said you weren't sure. Why did she feel so reassured after hearing your suggestion? What made her trust you so blindly? Mu Jianyun fired off a series of questions. Seeing Luo Fei at a loss for words, she jokingly tried to lighten the mood. If it were me, I wouldn't listen to you unless you were the one who planted the bomb. Ah, Huang Xiaoping. Now I understand why Inspector Zheng said it would be better if this man were dead. Mu Jianyun continued. I disagree with you. Didn't you see the calendar on the wall? The calendar is right. Huang Xiaoping marks off each day on the calendar, so he isn't just marking time. He is living his days, still pursuing and expecting something. So, in reality, his state of life is not as desperate as you see it. Luo Fei remembered the calendar Mu Jianyun mentioned. It was hanging on the wall by the door when they entered. After listening to Mu Jianyun's analysis, Luo Fei hesitated for a moment before finally nodding in agreement. Then he suddenly thought of something and started talking to himself, wondering what the situation was like with Han Hao and the others. At 7:55 a.m. on October 22nd, in the criminal police office, Zheng Rihua handed a note to Han Hao. Perhaps because he was used to using a computer and hadn't written by hand for a long time, the handwriting on the note was messy and ugly. Dongming Community, Building 12, Room 404, Sun Chunfeng, read the note. What does this mean? Han Hao asked. Go and arrest him at that location. Zheng Rihua replied nonchalantly, sitting down opposite Han Hao and tossing several photos onto the table. The photos featured a young man with dyed yellow hair, clearly taken in an internet cafe. Han Hao's heart lifted. These were the photos that had been deleted. How did you get the information on the note? Han Hao picked up the photos and examined them carefully, but he couldn't find any clues about the young man's address or name. Han Hao looked up at Zheng Rihua, puzzled. The photos were taken between 10:25 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. on October 18th. As I mentioned yesterday, Inspector Zheng found these internet cafes based on the information I provided. So, I just checked the network surveillance for that day. It was easy to determine that the photos were taken at the Qianghui Internet Cafe near the Normal University. I checked the cafe's records and found that the young man started surfing the internet at 9:10 a.m. and logged off at 12:09 p.m. I extracted the computer's hard drive and restored all the operation data from that time period. That's how I got his QQ number, 2 email addresses, and user information for 4 websites. Hey, including one from a shopping website. Zheng Rihua paused dramatically, then yawned widely, looking both tired and smug. Han Hao, who wasn't well versed in computers and the internet, still didn't fully understand. He was somewhat annoyed by Zheng Rihua's deliberate showiness, but forced himself to ask. And then, it got simpler after that. I checked the guy's shopping records. In the past 2 months, he made 5 online purchases, all delivered to Dongming Community, Building 12, Room 404. I contacted the local police station. The registered owner of the apartment is a middle-aged man named Zhang Jigang, but he doesn't live there. He rents it out. I also talked to Zhang Jigang. The current tenant is a young man named Sun Chunfeng, who moved in half a year ago. Zhang Jigang said he doesn't know much about the tenant, just that he has dyed yellow hair. Not bad, Han Hao said, but you could have just told me the address directly. You didn't need to trouble yourself with contacting the police station and the landlord. Zhang Rihua naturally sensed the implied criticism. He chuckled and shook his head nonchalantly. All right. I won't get involved in the next steps. I've been up all night. It's time for a good sleep. With that, he stretched, stood up, and left without another word. Han Hao shook his head at Zheng Rihua's retreating figure. The guy's laid-back attitude didn't seem very police-like, but his skills in network tracking were impressive. Determined to make the upcoming operation a success, Han Hao quickly picked up the phone on his desk. Hello, Yin Jian. Get Captain Xiong and come to my office immediately, he said. Okay, Yin Jian replied. At 8:31 a.m. on October 22nd, Dongming Community, an old residential area, was bustling with activity. The residents were mostly elderly people and those who couldn't afford their own homes and rented instead. At the moment, several unfamiliar faces appeared downstairs in Building 12. They were dressed in plain clothes and scattered in different corners, seemingly casual, but actually controlling all the major and minor exits of the area. These robust, middle-aged, and young men were all top-notch members of the criminal and special police units, urgently assembled for a secret arrest operation. Another team entered Unit 2 of Building 12. As they advanced, they left guards behind at various points. The core team had now arrived at the door of Room 404. Han Hao and Xiong Yuan, along with others, hid against the wall next to the door, while a short and chubby middle-aged man was brought to the front. This man was none other than the landlord, Zhang Jigang. As planned, Zhang Jigang rang the doorbell and loudly called out to collect the rent. But after a while, there was still no response from inside. Han Hao gestured to Yin Jian to take the landlord away from the scene. Then, a burly SWAT team member stepped out from behind Xiong Yuan. He quietly squatted down and inserted a thin wire into the lock. The SWAT team had all sorts of talents, and this young man named Lu Song was a master of picking locks. After a moment, with a soft click, the young man raised his left hand and gave an okay sign. Han Hao and the others, guns in hand, were ready to strike. After receiving a signal from Xiong Yuan, Lu Song gently pushed the door open. The others swiftly entered the room. It was an old, livable apartment with a narrow and dim living room, empty and devoid of people. There were faint rustling sounds coming from the bedroom. Han Hao took a few quick steps and rushed into the bedroom. A figure was wriggling under the window. He aimed his gun at the figure and shouted loudly. Xiong Yuan and the others followed. But as they saw the situation clearly, their tense expressions gradually turned into looks of surprise. A young man with yellow hair was sitting diagonally against the wall under the window. Undoubtedly, he was the target they had come to arrest, Sun Chunfeng. But this man, who had put the provincial police force on high alert, was tied up with his legs bound and his hands cuffed to the radiator. His eyes were covered with a black cloth, and his mouth was tightly taped, only able to make faint, muffled noises. Han Hao's heart sank as he realized something had gone wrong. He holstered his gun, stepped forward, and first tore off the black cloth from Sun Chuanfeng's face. The young man, terrified, twisted his body, staring wide-eyed and fixedly at Han Hao. Don't move. We're the police," Han Hao said. Sun Chuanfeng's eyes shifted from fear to anticipation. He looked at his own hands, seemingly eager to say something. Han Hao reached out to tear off the tape from Sun Chuanfeng's mouth. On the other side, at Xiong Yuan's gesture, the SWAT team member who had picked the lock earlier, Lu Song, stepped forward again. He took out a wire, preparing to do the same, and unlocked the cuffs binding the young man's hands. The moment Sun Chuanfeng's mouth was freed, he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Don't touch those cuffs! Oil bomb, oil bomb!"